In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about the rehabilitation of a lateral ankle sprain, which is what most people might understand as a twisted ankle where you've gone over on the side of your ankle. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what is it. I've kind of described it already, but we'll just go over it quickly so we have a better understanding. Then we're going to look at some of the tissues involved. So we're going to look at the ligaments, we're going to look at the muscles, and then finally we're going to look at some rehab guidelines. And I'll share with you a few more bits about rehabbing a lateral ankle sprain. To quickly cover what it is, well, as you can see by the image here, it's where we roll our ankle. So all of this area, or the outside of the ankle, outside of the foot, either gets stretched, torn, or ruptured. And lateral obviously means outside, and then we're mostly talking about ligaments, but obviously muscles are involved as well. Now, how does this happen? Well, we've got a few different causes. One is just general ligament laxity. So that could be from, say, a previous injury. It could be something as simple as just as a general rule, you have more lax ligaments. Then we've got something like high heels. Now, it's not only high heels, because you may well wear some unstable footwear, which is going to increase risk of rolling an ankle. So high heels is just one of those. And then the final one is contact. So this might be from, say, a game of football, a game of rugby, where you're changing direction, or your foot hits the floor when you're running, and it hits a stone, or one side of it hits the stone and the ankle rolls, or you just don't land correctly. So any of those could be causes or how a lateral ankle sprain happens. So what's happening? So where we've got stretching, tearing, and then rupture, and then we've got this ligament here, but we'll talk about this in a second, the ATFL. Stretching, as a general rule, you're able to continue activity. Partial tear, you're unable to continue activity. And then complete rupture, there may be a pop and you're unable to walk. And then we've got, with regards to swelling, for a stretching, you've got mild swelling. For a partial tear, you've got moderate swelling. And from complete rupture, you've got severe pain, and there will also be swelling as well. And if you just look over my right shoulder here, I've got my finger at the base of a book here. This is where I'm getting this content or this information from. So I can pop a link to that book in the description. So that's the lateral ankle sprain. So let's now start looking at the tissues involved. The ligaments involved, as we've seen, we've got one called ATFL, which is the anterior talofibrillar ligament, which is this one here. So this is essentially the ankle bone there. This is the heel, and obviously you can see the toes down here. So we're talking about these three main ligaments on the outside of the ankle. The second one is the CFL, the calcaneofibular ligament, which is this one here. And then you've got posterior talofibrillar ligament, which is the one on the back here. So all of these essentially are just about the location of it. So you've got anterior front, talus fibular ligament, calcaneofibular, so calcaneus, heel bone, fibular ligament. And then you've got back, posterior, talofibular ligament, so on and so forth. So these are the three ligaments that are involved, because they're all the ligaments on the outside of the ankle here. So when this ankle rolls, these three will become stretched, partially torn, or completely ruptured, depending on the severity of the contact. When it comes to muscles involved, certainly with regards to the rehabilitation of it, you've got soleus gastrocnemius, so these can become tight during it. So sports massage or massage in general in this area is going to be helpful, but we'll talk about a little bit more about that in the next slide. And then you've got the perineal muscle. So basically it's the muscles down the outside of the leg. Now, these muscles may not become torn or ruptured or stretched during the actual ankle sprain, but there is a good chance there's going to be some residual tightness through them once it's happened, to be able to stabilise the area, and that can obviously come about with some extra swelling, so on and so forth. So what we have to do is, as long as we understand where these muscles are, so with regards to the soleus, it's this muscle at the bottom here, which you can just see sort of underneath the Achilles tendon. It does join into the Achilles tendon. Then we've got the gastrocnemius, which is the sort of the bigger fleshy muscle, which has a lateral and a medial, this is the lateral, and the medial belly to it. So again, these will become tight, and then you've got the peroneal muscles sort of down the outside of the leg, which again will become tight, which is going to need to be massaged as we go through. And then finally, we've got sort of the rehab guidelines. So we've got 1 to 2 days of rest, ice, compression, elevation. So what that's basically there to do is we do want, as it says here, early mobilization. But if you literally cannot stand on the ankle, then there's not going to be a great deal that you'll be able to do with regards to single leg stance exercises, so on and so forth, because you can't stand on it. So certainly in the early days, what you may be able to do is just keep the ankle moving, but it would then need to be elevated to do that. So that would be just early on. There won't be any massage going on at the moment, because again, there will be swelling there. You don't really understand what the damage is unless you've had it looked at under X-ray, MRI, so on and so forth. So it's very much just resting and just keep some light mobilization to it to be able to keep it moving, because when it comes to rehabilitation, movement and mobilization actually aids the healing process, because as we get further on, we'll talk about it a little bit more, but the stress and the work that movement and mobilization gives these damaged tissues, the body recognizes that and starts laying down the tissue in those areas. So when it comes to sort of 2 to 4 weeks, we've got things like balance training, stretching, and massage. So massage that we would do would be just frictions. Now frictions you might do with a thumb or a sort of a finger that's sort of, you would place it over, or sort of 2 thumbs together. If you're doing your own ankle, you may be able to get away with just 1 thumb. But all it is just a very simple, you would place it on top of one of these ligaments. You'll be able to feel it because it'll be quite sensitive. So you need to manage the pressure, but you just make just little circles sort of all the way up and all the way down that ligament. And then you would do the same in here, all the way to the front, all the way to the back of the ligament, all the way to the front, all the way to the back of the ligament. So it's just little circles that you're making with regards to frictions. Now stretching, you wouldn't necessarily stretch these ligaments, but you would be looking to stretch soleus and certainly the gastroc muscles early on to try and keep those from becoming overly tight, so you can maintain a degree of dorsiflexion. And then once the swelling's down, you can put pressure on the foot. You can start to think about balance training, which will start to then integrate these peroneal muscles. The muscles of the feet will start to work as well, to start building that proprioception back into the ankle and back into the foot, so you're able to regain adequate balance after the injury has sort of subsided. Because one thing that you can get is something called muscle guarding, which is where the muscles stay overly tight because they perceive instability in the area. So that's where the stretching and the movement and the mobilization and the exercises come in very well, because it helps the body and the brain learn that there is no guarding to be done, that the stability is there, and that it can carry on with everyday life, if you will. When it comes to 5 to 8 weeks, we would look at more weight-bearing exercises. So this up here might be just body weight. Obviously, that is weight-bearing, and we've got a degree of balance training going on, but it's nothing. So it might just be as simple as a single leg stance, if that's what is needed. When we come onto here, this is where we would start adding additional load with dumbbells, with kettlebells, with barbells, so on and so forth. We would extend the range of movement of it, so we would start going back to, say, much more functional type exercises in these weight-bearing exercises. But I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail because this video would then turn into quite a long video. And then after that, so week 9, I guess should be a plus there. We would look at strength training and sports training. So going back to the strength training in the gym, which would be relatively similar to sort of previous levels before the injury, and then sports training, which is more the skills for the sport, which is changing of direction if it's needed, accelerating, decelerating, so on and so forth. Obviously, that will probably be brought in with the weight-bearing exercises, but at a much lower level, but then in some respects brought back to sort of normal levels, sort of week 9 plus. So those are some guidelines for lateral ankle rehabilitation. Again, the book is just behind me here. I'll leave the link in the description if you want to check that book out. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris. I'll speak to you in the next tutorial.